Welcome to the London Property Podcast, your go-to source for navigating the complex and ever-changing London real estate market. Our digital marketplace provides informative and educational content from industry leaders through podcasts and videos. We cover various aspects of the real estate experience, including buying and selling, finance, law, tax, construction, design, and more. Join us as we delve into the latest trends and developments in the market and gain valuable insights from our panel of experts.
Hello and welcome to London Property. I am your host Farnaz Fazaipour, and today we're delighted to welcome to the show Hugo Busby of Busby Consultants. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hugo is a chartered surveyor, and we're going to be discussing today the subject of valuation for tax purposes, for insurance purposes, matrimonial. And I'm going to pass it on to Hugo to tell us a little bit about himself and his career, and then broadly speaking, explain to us what's involved in these different types of valuations that you offer.
Okay. Well, my background is largely rural in that I used to be trained as a land agent at the Royal Agricultural College. And following that, I went managed country estates and qualified as a chartered surveyor 30 years ago, which I can't believe. And progressively, I moved towards valuation for tax purposes. I became and still am, a consultant for Allsops in London, dealing with Southwest portfolios. And I work with solicitors and accountants primarily on valuation for tax purposes. I also do asset valuation, so that might be something that's going into your pension or similar. I have, just through contacts and people I know, have also bought property, predominantly rural, but I've got a lot of experience of working with HMRC and solicitors and being able to provide the type of valuation that works for the client and HMRC understand. Some people might go to estate agents, but it's slightly different. I'm more objective in what I do, and I really have to benchmark the true value of that because, as we know, inheritance tax and capital gains tax is quite high, and if you overvalue, which some agents might do because they're looking for instructions, if you're paying tax, that's a lot of money, and so you don't want to pay any more than you need to.
Correct. So if we were to talk about valuation for tax, so just to give us a list of what that includes. So we've got probate, capital gains tax.
Yeah, they're the
main ones.
Prime drivers when somebody sells an asset other than their own main residence. They're, as a rule, should pay capital gains tax. And if you're dealing with a deceased estate after the various allowances, you have to pay inheritance tax. And so it's the important, this is quite a simple equation, but if you can get the inheritance tax valuation down at the very lowest point in the market, inheritance tax is paid at 40%. I think I'm right in saying capital gains tax is at 28%. So if you pay your, say if you're leasing me, if you pay your inheritance tax for a very realistic value, if you do come to sell within a year or so, you will have to pay capital gains tax, but that is a smaller amount. You don't want, so ideally you pay as little inheritance tax as possible.
So you get called in at the time of probate. So yes. The family need to know for HMRC what is the value of the estate for. Yes,
that has to be reported. So solicitors, unless it's very low value property, I mean, if it's very low value property, I'd be the first to say you can go and ask 3 estate agents to give you values and they'll look at the sort of average in amongst that. But I'd be talking, say, sub 250,000. As you go up into talking about hundreds of thousands of variations in value at 40%, you really don't want to be offering any more than you need to. So it's advising solicitors and accountants for their clients in the best way forward.
Okay. And is there anything else in tax that comes into it? What about when people are getting divorced?
Yes, I've acted as joint expert or advocate. Again, it's joint expert is preferable because that means they're willing to accept me as an independent valuer. Sometimes they don't hear what they want to hear. One party, as we all know, can happen, and they might ask for another valuation. But the whole basis of whether it's inheritance tax, capital gains tax, matrimonial, asset valuation is the market value at that point in time. And as you know, there are plenty of things that influence it, the economy, global happenings, anything that can make it go up and down. And especially over the last few years, you can be talking about variables of sort of 10% shifts. If you start at one end of the year and get to the other end, there could have been a dip or a rise.
Right.
And you've just got to use that. And sometimes, say there's indices and whatever. Again, they will benchmark it, but having true knowledge of what you're dealing with is important. Because every house really is different. I mean, in London, it's slightly different. It's a little easier because you've got great terraces, and so it's sort of on condition, but the condition of the property. If you go into rural areas, every village is different, every house is different, or even if town's outside London. So research is paramount. And the other thing is you must be able to justify your valuation should HMRC, or should you be in a court of law, because you could end up there being cross-examined. So you've got to be robust in what you say. It's not just possible to say, is that a helpful figure or something? You've got to be able to defend it. So, yeah, but you don't want to pay more than you need.
Yeah, yes. And would you say that, with your other hat on, where you're running an auction house, does that help you in some of the valuations that you do, in the sense that people might need to then also have their content valued?
Well, I'd like to think that our business is... Well, it is. It's very holistic. I often find the more people you involve, the greater the cost can be. So frequently, I have a fellow director. He'll deal with the contents of the property. I'll deal with the house. We're down in Sussex at Petworth the other day, large country house. I dealt with the property side, and he dealt with the content. So there is some value to solicitors, etc., that we can offer that service. Yes.
Okay. And people often don't know what steps they should take. Now, with regards to the capital gains tax, for example, I know that when they changed the regulations, it was in 2018, where people who are overseas had to kind of have a fixed valuation so that they know what they had to pay now that they were kind of onboarded with having to pay capital gains tax. So do you get asked to do that? So if somebody, for example, owns a property now in an offshore entity, do you have to then go back to the date that legislation was entered?
Well, actually, capital gains tax, the base year was March 1982. So sometimes you're in a position where you've got to produce a reasoned case for the value you have to go retrospectively back, sometimes to 1982 or the date of purchase between that time, to justify the values to work out the tax.
Right, that was actually going to be my next question. So
if the records exist.
What can you deduct from capital gains tax?
It's, there's the obvious cost of purchase, legal costs, all those.
They're all deductible.
They're all deductible. But then if it wasn't fit for habitation in the broader sense, or needed serious modification in order to make it habitable, such as new kitchens, new bathrooms, rewiring, those sort of costs, they're deductible too. But ideally you have records.
Right.
For that.
Right. It's not that you can apply that in the last 40 years I've refurbished this building twice and I don't have all the documents, but we can add X percentage.
You might be able to.
Right.
But obviously evidence is always best.
Is the best way to go about it. Yeah. Okay.
And not everyone's thinking about that, of course. But most people, if they're doing major works, keep some record.
So with regards to inheritance tax, we're all basing it on a number that was assigned as a relief going back to wherever. So there's no talk in the market about that number changing.
I don't think the number will change. I think the way things are at present, taxes may rise based on what we heard today from our Chancellor and plans expenditure. I think it helps to do tax planning and talk to professionals who can advise you on that. That is the best advice, because one thing I've certainly learned with deceased estates for inheritance tax, it's very difficult to solve after the event. To put everything in place, whether you're going to use a trust or whatever, when you want to pass property or contents on to loved ones, it's very difficult to make arrangements after the event, because everything gets frozen, everything has to be accounted for. So planning is a good idea.
Yeah.
Whatever happens with taxes along the line.
Right.
I mean, it's a bit like they brought in inheritance tax on farms and agricultural land, and a lot of people buying land, possibly for tax purposes, because it was inheritance tax 3 if you were seen as a farmer. You were able to pass it on. Obviously, that's now changed, and that may be quite destructive. And
have you felt any of that in your work?
I think there's a lot of concern, and people are having to rethink, because certainly at the smaller end, people actually survive on agriculture. That is their business. I mean, it'll just destroy family farms that have been there for generations. I'm not going to go and talk about agricultural land as an investment, but it's not something you'd really, the returns are so low as an investment. I don't think it's where people just farm because that's their livelihood and that's what they've always done. And so
a lot of those people are now going to be really challenged.
Very challenged, or they'll have to break up the farms, or they'll have to sell off the farms or go out of business. I mean, there's been one or two sad cases of senior members actually, taking their own lives to avoid the tax. It's a badly thought. There's nothing wrong with taxing certain elements of society that possibly afford it, but these people can't afford it. So it's slightly ill thought.
I think ill thought is a big topic with the current state of the economy. There's a lot of things that could be questioned as being ill thought. On the valuation side again, so you're actually based in Dorset.
I'm based in Dorset, but we work. If I talk about both companies, we do a lot of, for example, insurance work around the country. So which again has become more critical because the cost of labour, materials and repairs has gone up so much in the last 5 years. People could find that their properties are extremely undervalued by up to 50%. Should something awful happen, and occasionally it does, but we work for various brokers, and we travel all over the country, and we also deal with it's another way where we're holistic. We also deal with the contents insurance at the same time. So, for example, we were in Wiltshire the other day at a large racing yard, and we valued all the buildings for reinstatement, and I'll explain that in a second, and also all the contents for insurance replacement. Can I just explain that, because some people often get confused. So reinstatement cost does not mean the value of your property as it stood there. It's the cost as if it was erased from the earth and had to be rebuilt. And the cost of doing that is depending where you are geographically, can vary immensely. And when it comes to getting possessions valued, the insurance world works on a replacement basis. So that means, say if you've got, a nice wardrobe, cashmere jumpers or lovely jewellery, it assumes you're going to go in somewhere like Burlington Arcade and say, I want that, that, and that. So that's retail replacement. And so that's not market value. So also with the costs of insurance rising so much, a lot of people are taking a look at their policies and what they pay. So sometimes we'll value on the market value. So that would assume you would go to an auction or something and pay what the market pays on the day. Because if you're paying for a replacement basis on contents, you can be paying on your premium a multiplier, especially with jewellery, of 3 or 4 times its actual value, which makes premiums go up a lot. So those are 2 areas, again, that people may want to look at. Are they correctly insured? Sometimes, because with the value of brown furniture, it's fallen so much in value, we might reduce the premium you're paying.
Okay, so that's quite an important thing to do.
Yeah, well, yes, it's a boring thing to do, and there is a cost. I'd like to think we're reasonable. We do a lot of work in London, possibly because we,
bringing Dorset prices to London.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. You can call it that, or a day out for us, whatever. And so you might find contents values might go down, but I can guarantee the cost of reinstatement will go up unless your broker or insurance company have been applying multipliers and indices. Then you can find that you could be very overinsured. I mean, I've just, again, a property that it hadn't been looked at for years. So it was being insured for £5 million and we brought it back down to £2.5 million.
So talk me through that. How did that happen?
Because they obviously had a value at one point that it was insured of for rebuilding. And they just applied the indices in-house over the time. It multiplied it. But when you went back and looked at it properly, because I use an index, it's a BCIS, it's Building Cost Information Services, which moves every month. And geographically, they'd actually increased it more than the cost would have been for that type of building.
Right. And I'm assuming they're not giving any of that back.
No, well, I'd like to think they would.
Yeah.
So because they'll be able to say, actually, we've revisited our values and we're half as much, so the premium should reduce accordingly. And I think you have to keep looking at these things.
Okay.
Or every 3 years you ought to review it.
You ought to review it. So that's a really sensible thing that I actually had not thought about or been told before. So that's a very sensible thing to do.
That.
Yeah, exactly.
It's when you come to claim that you may wish you'd done it.
You'd done it. So unrelated to the valuations that you're doing, have you noticed a big difference in prices between London and the country? Are you seeing an upward movement in the country and a downward movement in London?
We're talking property.
Yeah.
I would say it's all pretty quiet. There's a lot of, I look at both and I have to research both, and whether whether when we're in Petworth or I've just been in near Sandbanks in Poole looking at property, or whether you're in a small Dorset village. Again, sorry, I'll come back to answer your question properly. The prices have risen and fallen. You shift it to any point in a certain year, and it may have gone down or up. It's quite volatile. I think London prices, to me, have gone down. I know in the countryside there's a lot of stock, housing stock for sale. There's a lot of reductions. My own personal opinion is that property became much more important to people about sort of 10, 15 years ago, maybe more. And everyone got quite greedy about the value, and it's getting that price right, really. And that's why I think at the moment you're seeing reductions in items for sale. I think it's a buyer's market at the moment. And, you have to ask your question, if it's a good time to buy, it's probably not a good time to sell. Right.
And so the sellers are going to be the ones who really need to sell at this point.
Yes. Well, that's. Who knows what pressures come on? But I looked at a case it was just a development actually of 8 flats, and they'd just gone bust because they'd underestimated the cost of building completely, and they just had to get out of it. The banks had foreclosed on them. So there's a bit more of that kind of thing when I talk to my business manager. They're just not taking on that kind of business. And you've got, if you work in property and it involves development or anything like that, turning property around, if you've got to take out debt, you've got to be very certain of where the market's going, because it may cost you more than it's worth, and then that spells trouble.
Yeah, keeping that at 50% loan to value is how I try and sleep at night. But yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
But if it needs work, that's an unknown.
Yeah.
And I think, again, certainly, well, it would apply everywhere. It used to be you could buy a place, do it up, whether you're going to live there or not, and you'd be able to cut a margin out. You'd see something, whatever the market was doing. Now, I think it's really easy to buy a place that needs doing up, and it may end up costing you more than its value when it's finished. And
so you better be holding on for 20 years at that point.
If you can find somewhere that needs nothing doing apart from cosmetic, that's worth a lot more than a place that's run down.
Yes, we're seeing that a lot, actually. We're seeing that a lot, that people are just not buying on modernised properties.
And actually, when it comes to the tax valuations, if I come back to that, that is becoming significant when you're reporting to HMRC. It's a significant condition, because before you might say, I don't know, I'll keep it basic, something like 1 bedroom flat. I've got to spend, it needs about £20,000 worth, just to tidy up, kitchen, bathroom, that kind of thing. Now you'd be looking at 50 or 60. So therefore, you've got to take that off the market value if it needs work. Where you might have taken 5 to 10% off, maybe you've got to take 20% off, but you've got to be prepared to argue that or have that argument in place. And that, again, comes back to getting a competent surveyor or valuer to produce that market valuation.
Which is where you come in.
Well, that's up to others to decide.
Well, listen, it's important, I think, for our listeners. So here at London Property, we help people manage property wealth, and managing property wealth, is a very big topic. So it's important for our listeners to know that, there are services out there specifically for tax reasons and valuations and matrimony. So we're very happy that you joined us today. And, if we get any questions after this, then obviously we'll come back to you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. Always happy to help people.
Brilliant.
If they've got a question.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. And if you are in a situation where you need to present your case to the HMRC, then there are services out there, as we've discussed, in order to help you with all of those processes, whether it's matrimonial, insurance.
Yeah, insurance, capital gains, inheritance tax. Property's worth a lot of money now, and you might end up paying more than you need to. There is some value in getting the job done properly when you're paying 40% of a large sum.
Yes.
Every little bit helps.
Every little bit helps. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and no doubt we'll be pulling on your services in the near future. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to our latest episode of the London Property Podcast. Head over to our website where you can browse our exclusive network of top experts driving the market. As a member, you'll have direct access to our experts and their networks. Our award-winning content will help you choose the right professionals for your needs and make informed decisions about your investments. Personal recommendations are a powerful tool in connecting with trusted professionals. Let us introduce you to the right people to help you achieve your real estate goals. Contact us now to learn more about becoming a member and gaining access to these valuable resources, or joining our directory of experts.